This video was such a chore to go through, but as far as I can see, he presented 2 points. So let's have a listen.
So there are ways you can avoid this situation. Simply put, vegans need to reframe the way in which they think about crop deaths to begin with. There is a huge distinction, which many vegans don't realize is super relevant here, between the crop deaths derived from plant agriculture and the animal deaths derived from animal agriculture in the form of free-range farming, which may cause less crop deaths than plant agriculture. Of course, we're assuming that's the case just for the sake of this video. This big distinction between the victims of crop deaths and the victims of free-range animal farming is that animals who die in free-range animal farming are bred into existence, whereas the animals who die in crop farming are not. So why does this matter? This matters because it tells us that animal agriculture generates the existence of animals who would have otherwise never existed, who are eventually murdered, while the animals who die in crop fields already exist in the wild, where natural predator-prey cycles are occurring. Some of these animals are eaten alive or killed off by some other form of nature, enduring horrific kinds of death. With this in mind, we really do not have a strong reason to believe that buying crops actually increases overall death or disutility in the world. My point here is not that, okay, crop deaths are a good thing, or that the suffering of the victims of crop deaths is perfectly okay. My point here is that we do not have a strong reason to believe that buying crops actually causes a net increase in disutility or deaths. In fact, there may even be a reason to believe that doing so increases utility, given how much more suffering and death may occur in a wild field compared to a crop field. However, I'm pretty agnostic on that specific point. So just to be clear, when it comes to overall deaths, the relevant difference between buying animal products and plant products is that buying animal products creates beings that will be killed who would have otherwise never existed, and therefore increases overall death.
The first point is that we supposedly have no strong reason to believe that buying crops causes net increase in death or disutility in the world. But he additionally says this.
While in the case of buying crops, it is ambiguous as to whether or not there is an increase in overall deaths.
That makes no sense to me. How can you draw a firm conclusion about something when admittedly information about the thing is ambiguous? He also says there may even be a reason to believe that crop deaths increases utility, but he says he's an agnostic when it comes to that, which makes it to be a worthless piece of information. The second point is that there is a distinction between crop deaths and animal farming deaths, because in the latter case, animals are bred into existence and that increases overall deaths. The issue is that he already, for the sake of the video, accepted there exists animal farming, which results in less crop deaths. Case in point.
And as a side note, the meat eater, of course, would need to empirically show that the free-range farms they're postulating do entail less overall deaths than traditional plant farming. This would need to be done in the form of some kind of a comparative analysis. Most non-vegans who bring this up never provide such a thing, but let's continue as if they did, just for the sake of this video.
So bringing the fact that animals are bred into existence is completely impotent. His point on hunting is also mind-boggling. Let's have a listen.
So what about when a person brings up hunting one giant moose per year versus causing crop deaths by eating a vegan diet? If you think about it, this case of animal eating does not entail the breeding of animals, similar to how causing crop deaths does not. Well, again, there is not a reason to believe that causing crop deaths even decreases utility to begin with. In fact, as stated earlier, there may be reason to believe that replacing wild fields with crop fields may actually increase utility because of how much suffering and death occur in the wild. But understand that even if we're agnostic on this one particular aspect of veganism when it comes to utility going up or down, we are not agnostic with arguably the strongest aspect of veganism, which increases utility, which is the part where you don't fund a holocaust of bred into existence animals. With this, we can conclude that going vegan is a good thing with respect to increasing utility.
So hunting avoids breeding animals into existence. Awesome. But instead of arguing that it doesn't end up with fewer animals getting killed, which is an important part of the video, he discarded it by talking about utility of crop deaths and not funding animal holocausts, which has nothing to do with hunting. Then he continues.
Bringing up hunting one giant moose per year as a kind of moral obligation to commit rather than going vegan, which we've established is good, is quite silly. Unless you are a slave consequentialist and think that even if something is good, like veganism, you ought to always do the thing that is better than that which is good. A similar parallel is saying that it's morally wrong to donate to one charity because you can donate to another charity, which would cause an overall increase in utility. If you're not a slave consequentialist like I am not, then this doesn't really apply to you. Let's also not forget that utility and death count are not all that matter in morality when it comes to a person like myself who identifies most as a threshold deontologist. One can still deontologically object to killing a moose over buying crops, even if we assumed that killing one giant moose per year resulted in less net animal deaths than buying crops. The nature of killing can matter too.
He spent a big chunk of the video talking about a number of deaths and disutility, but then it turns out it's not relevant when hunting could possibly beat veganism at it. I think it's pretty obvious he's all over the place, and instead of debunking the argument, he just tried to bypass it by subscribing to some particular position concerning ethics. And even with that, he has no relevant information for anything. Some things are ambiguous, and he's an agnostic in other things.